Welcome everyone to a sneak preview of Tableau's new product, Project Maestro. For those of you who don't know what Project Maestro is, it is a new product on the data prep ETL side. Maestro will allow you to be able to focus less on prepping data and focus more on analyzing your data in Tableau Desktop, Tableau Server, or Tableau Online. During this data demo, I will be using two different data sets. The first one you see here on the screen is an Excel workbook that contains a pivot table of alcohol transactions by month. And the data used here is an open source online. It's the City of Toronto's PCard data. Now, in this scenario, I have received this pivot table of alcohol transactions. However, there's a couple key things missing here. Of course, we can see that the table itself is in a cross-tab, human-readable type format, which, as you know, isn't Tableau friendly. So I'm going to use Maestro to clean up this data set and also join it with a second Excel workbook called PCard transaction details because we can see that our crosstab that showed previously is missing a lot of information, such as who made the purchase, the purpose of the purchase, where the purchase was made, etc. So let's go ahead and jump into Maestro. Again, just want to clarify that this is a beta, so things that you see here may not end up in the actual release of the project. Now, just like in Tableau Desktop, the very first thing you have to do in Maestro is connect to data. We still have the blue connect to data screen over here on the left-hand side, so it's very similar looking to desktop. Something else that you'll find is similar are links to some how-to videos, sample workflows, documentation links, as well as the most recent workflows in the center here. I'm going to go ahead and click on Start, choose Connect to Data. And because I'm working with an Excel spreadsheet, I'll go ahead and choose Microsoft Excel as the connection. From here, I just need to navigate to the folder in which that file lives in. Choose the file I want to open. And Maestro will go ahead and read in that Excel file so I can begin my data prep. Now the first thing that I notice here in looking at my field names and some of the sample values that these rows contain is that my field names aren't coming through as expected. As a result, I see F1 through F9. Just like you can in desktop, in Maestro we have Tableau's data interpreter. I'm going to click on the data interpreter over here on the left-hand side, and what this is going to do is it's going to get rid of any extra headers, footers, merged cells, as well as split up multiple tables if they exist in one sheet. Once the data interpreter runs, what I can see here is I now have this new sheet for alcohol transactions that I can go ahead and bring into the view. I can see that unlike the first sheet, this sheet does display my field names as well as some sample values. So I can go ahead and click on the sheet I brought in initially and remove it. Now to view your data, we can click on the little plus sign to the right of my sheet and choose to add a step. Adding a step will allow you to see all your data in one place. You can see here I have across the top all of my different columns, as well as a nice count summary of how many rows there are for each member in each column. If you want to see rows that are related, you can simply click on a column, and you'll notice that this blue highlighting portion is showing me how that batch ID distributes data-wise across all other columns. Below, you'll see an example of what your data looks like. Now, at this particular point here, we can see that there's an issue with our data. We have some categorical information within the names of each one of these columns. So rather than having my data for my PCard transactions spread across multiple columns, I want to combine them into one column so I have my transactions in one and my month and years in another. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and have to add a new step here. And I need to choose the Add Pivot option. Pivot will allow me to select the fields that I want to pivot. I'm going to highlight all of my months here. Unhighlight Batch Transaction ID since I don't want to pivot that column. And then just drag them over to Pivot Field Values. Once that's done, I can see the results right here on one screen, making it easy to see if I pivoted the correct information. At this point, everything looks okay. I now have one column for pivot names and another for pivot values. But I'm going to go ahead and double click on the column names themselves to give them a more descriptive title. At this point, I can see the results here, and I can go ahead and add another step to further clean up some of this data. One thing I noticed is that month year should probably be two different columns. So in this step, what I want to do is I want to split these. Now, rather than creating a calculation, what I can do is I can click on the drop-down arrow in the top right-hand corner of month year, go to split values, and I can either choose automatic split, which will have Tableau automatically split these two columns by a specific space or some type of character that these have in common. Or if I want, I can choose custom split and allow to define that common character myself. I'm going to go ahead and choose custom split. The separator here is a space. And then I can choose how many fields I want. In this case, I'm going to have two columns, month and year, so I want two different fields. And then I can go ahead and select split. We can see here that Tableau has successfully splitted my month year column into two columns, month year split 1 and month year split 2. Again, here these names don't really make much sense, so what we can do is double click and choose to rename this month and then choose to rename this to year. Now, as you can see before, these specific custom splits are actually a calculation. So if I didn't know that custom split existed, or if I wanted to, I could potentially have created a calculated field as well. Notice that there is a trail or audit of what is happening here. If I click on changes, I can expand the changes for each step, and I can see exactly what has gone on here. I can see the two split fields that I created, and as I click on the steps, you can see the changes reflected over here on the right-hand side. Now, because I have already split these two columns, it's really not necessary to have this month-year column. So I'm going to choose it by selecting it or clicking on it, and then choosing to remove this field altogether. Notice at the top of each step, you also see little icons indicating exactly what each step is doing. But to further help orient someone who's looking at this workflow, you can also double-click on some of these annotations and rename them. So for example, perhaps instead of clean 1, I want to go ahead and let people know that in this particular step, I was just viewing the data. Whereas on pivot, I was pivoting the month year. And as for this step here, I split the month year and renamed the columns. Now at this point, I have finished cleaning one of my data sets, the alcohol transaction pivot table, this one that we started with at the very beginning. But as I mentioned before, this pivot table lacks specific detailed information that I need for my analysis. So I'm going to bring in my transaction detail data set to help add additional data needed for my analysis. Let's go ahead and go back into our workflow. And this time what I'm going to do is click on Add to the right of Connections. This will allow me to choose a new data source to connect to. I'm going to choose Excel since that's what I'm working with here today. Bring in my PCard transaction details and click Open. Notice Tableau will now designate a new color for my new data set so that I can see throughout my workflow which data comes from which spreadsheet. Now, looking at this data, it doesn't look like it needs to be, it doesn't look like we need to turn on the Tableau data interpreter because I do see my field names and some sample values. But just to start getting an idea of what I need to do with this data, like before, I'm going to click on the add sign to my new transaction details, choose to add a step, and again, this step is simply to view the shape of the data currently. Now, one thing I notice is when I'm looking at this data, I can see that this data contains a lot of different audit types. It includes alcohol, as well as other different audit types that I'm not currently interested in this particular analysis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose to filter the audit type by selecting audit type and choosing the filter field icon . By choosing audit type, clicking on the drop-down arrow, choosing filter values, and saying I only want the audit types that are equal to alcohol. You can see here that this calculation looks much like it does in Tableau Desktop, where you have your functions over here on the right-hand side with a description, an example, and definition, as well as built-in validation to make sure your calculations do not contain any errors. Once I go ahead and click on Save, you'll see that Tableau now has a little filter above this step indicating that this particular step we have filtered out some of this data. And we can see now that all we contain is alcohol. Now as I look through all the columns of data I have available, it looks like there are some that are not necessarily needed, such as holiday here. So I'm going to go ahead and just click on holiday and choose to remove this field. Now my data containing my transaction details for alcohol is ready to be joined to my alcohol transaction data set. From here, what we can do is rather than clicking on the add sign or plus sign, we can simply click and drag and create this line here, in which I can drag to my previous data set. And what you can see is that I now have two new icons appear, one for a new join and one for union. Now, if I think about this data, it definitely does not contain the same column headers, so we're going to go with new join rather than new union. Once I let go of my mouse, Tableau will update to show me exactly how I can join these two together. One thing we can see is that Tableau has gone through the individual columns and has found that batch ID exists in both. And so that is what we're using as our join clause. However, if you want to change a join clause, you can do so by clicking on the current clause that exists and making the change here. Or you can add additional join clauses by clicking on this plus sign. Below this, we have a nice Venn diagram in which we are allowed to see the join type and be able to play around and see exactly what our results and summary of results shown down here would look like if we choose a different join type. Now, if I think about this data, the join that I really want is going to be all of the data from my alcohol transaction, the data set that we started with, and only those rows that match on my detail data set. So I really want a right join. Just to verify this, I can go ahead and look at my join results, and I can see how many rows are going to be included in this join. We can see the 288 rows are coming from my split data set, or rather that first alcohol transaction data set we worked with at the very beginning. And then 36 of those rows will be coming from the second detailed transaction. If you ever want to see what's included or excluded, you can click on the individual bar charts or bars in this chart to see exactly what is being brought in to your join. Let's go ahead and now open up a new step to take a look at our joined data set here. From the looks of it, most of this already looks like it's ready for Tableau. However, as I scroll over to purpose, I can see that a lot of these purposes are very redundant. So I'm going to click on the drop-down menu and choose to group some of these items together. You'll notice that there's a couple of options here. You can manually group items together, or you could use two of our built-in groupings, one called pronunciation, which of course will group things based on pronunciation, or there's common characters, also known as fuzzy matching or clustering, which will index things based on spelling and make sure that you get rid of any duplicates or any extra character spaces that aren't needed. I'm going to go ahead and choose pronunciation here. And what you'll see are the results of what Tableau has grouped together. So as we click on these different members underneath purpose, we can see that in this first grouping, it simply grouped alcohol for resale and alcohol and bar supplies together. If you want to ungroup them, all you need to do is hover over the right-hand side and click on the minus sign. However, if you've gone through all the items that have been grouped and you approve of these changes, we can simply click on the X in the top right-hand corner and go back to just looking at the column itself. Now, I can go ahead and from here open up a sample of this data in Tableau, or I can choose to output the data in a particular folder. In this case, I'm just going to click the plus sign, choose to add an output, choose my output type, and rename the output as well. Once you create a name, we can go ahead and click on Run Flow to run through the workflow and produce the output in the particular folder that I specified here. You can also save your workflow so that others can leverage it. You may want to rename some of these steps before saving it. But once you have renamed everything so that it would make sense to an end user viewing the workflow, you can always go to File, Save As, and save your workflow. And that's all I had for the demo today. I hope that you all will be encouraged to go ahead and go to our Project Maestro page and sign up for the beta and begin using Maestro on your own data. If you'd like a little bit more about the PCard analysis, check out this YouTube video created by someone at Tableau that shows how you can take the data that you prepped today in Maestro, or that I prepped today in Maestro, and visualize insights in Tableau. You'll also notice some sneak peeks to this video, including our preview of our extensions API that allows Tableau and narrative science to have or play together in the same dashboard.